the first thing I realized was that humiliation does not always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in a polite smile, surrounded by expensive decorations, while everyone pretends nothing is wrong. I was 26 years old when I walked into my younger brother's wedding rehearsal dinner wearing the nicest dress I had ever owned. By the time the night was over, the wedding was gone, a family had fallen apart, and the truth everyone tried so hard to hide was finally standing in the middle of the room for everyone to see. My name is Madison, but everyone calls me Maddie. I have spent most of my life believing that hard work could solve almost anything. It could not fix heartbreak, but it could keep the lights on, pay for groceries, and make sure there was always enough gas in the car to get to my next shift. I worked mornings at a small neighborhood diner and spent most evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. Even with both jobs, there were weeks when rent came first and everything else had to wait. New clothes were a luxury I almost never allowed myself, which was why the navy blue dress hanging in my closet meant more than anyone could understand. I had saved for 3 months to buy it from a second-hand boutique because I wanted to look my best on one of the biggest days of my little brother's life. My brother Ethan is only 2 years younger than I am, but anyone who knows us would probably think he was the older sibling. Life forced him to grow up much faster than most teenagers ever should. When our father packed a suitcase and disappeared without saying goodbye, I was 15 years old. Ethan had just turned 13. I still remember hearing the front door close and waiting for hours. Convinced Dad would walk back through it, he never did. Something inside me broke that day. I stopped eating properly, barely slept, and nearly failed my sophomore year because I could not focus on anything except the empty chair at our dinner table. During those months, Ethan quietly became the person holding our family together. He was just a skinny kid with oversized sneakers and a backpack that always looked too heavy for him. Yet every night he sat on the floor beside my bed because he knew I hated being alone. Sometimes he brought me a granola bar from the kitchen after Mom left for work. Other nights he made up ridiculous jokes that were so terrible I laughed just because they were awful. He never tried to fix my pain. He simply refused to let me face it alone. Looking back now, I honestly believe I would not have made it through those years without him. Our mother worked double shifts almost every day to keep a roof over our heads. That meant Ethan and I learned to rely on each other more than anyone else. I helped him with homework, made dinner whenever I could, and drove him to baseball practice after I finally got my license. When he broke his arm riding his bike at 12, I stayed beside his hospital bed until the doctor finished wrapping the cast. When I struggled with panic attacks after Dad left, Ethan was the one who reminded me to keep breathing. We were more than brother and sister, we were teammates trying to survive the same storm together. Years passed and life slowly became manageable again. We were never wealthy, but we stopped living in survival mode. Ethan started a small construction business with one of his friends after high school. It took years of long hours and constant stress, but eventually the business became successful. I was proud of everything he built because I knew exactly how hard he had worked for every single dollar. Watching him succeed felt almost as rewarding as succeeding myself because I remembered the frightened little boy who had once sat outside my bedroom door just to make sure I was not crying alone. Everything changed when Ethan met Charlotte. At first, I truly liked her. She was beautiful, confident, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know our family. She came from a world that looked nothing like ours. She had attended private schools, spent summers on the coast, and talked casually about vacations that cost more than my yearly income. Her father owned several luxury golf resorts, while her mother organized charity galas attended by people whose names appeared in magazines. Even though our lives could not have been more different, Charlotte smiled warmly during our first few family dinners and asked questions about my work as though she respected it. The changes happened so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. After Ethan proposed, Charlotte's attitude shifted in tiny ways that were impossible to call out without sounding overly sensitive. She started calling me sweetheart with a voice that felt sweet on the surface but somehow managed to make me feel small every single time. Whenever we talked, she spent more time looking at her phone than at me. She constantly mentioned stories about college friends before pausing with fake surprise and saying she had forgotten I never went to college. She never actually forgot. She wanted me to remember the difference between us. Her family made those differences even harder to ignore. During one birthday dinner, her mother, Victoria, smiled politely before asking if I still lived in that neighborhood. She stretched the word neighborhood in a way that made it sound like a warning instead of a place. Her father, Charles, shook my hand exactly once. After that evening, he barely acknowledged my existence. Whenever I visited, conversations seemed to stop for just a second before starting again as though I had interrupted something important. Nobody insulted me directly. That was never their style. Their cruelty was polished, elegant, and hidden beneath perfect manners. Ethan noticed that I became quieter around Charlotte, but he never understood why. More than once he asked whether something was wrong between us. Every single time I smiled and blamed exhaustion from work. I refused to create problems during the happiest period of his life. He had sacrificed so much for me growing up that the last thing I wanted was to become the source of conflict in his engagement. If swallowing my pride meant protecting his happiness, then I convinced myself it was worth it. A few months before the wedding, my old car broke down while I was driving home from my evening shift. The transmission failed completely, and the repair cost was more money than I had in my savings account. Ethan found out and immediately paid the mechanic before I even had the chance to argue. He called it an early birthday gift because he knew I would never accept charity. I thanked him over and over, promising I would repay him somehow, but he refused to hear it. He simply hugged me and reminded me that family helped family. Charlotte learned about the repair a few days later. She smiled at Ethan and told him it was wonderful that he took care of his sister. Her words sounded supportive, but her eyes told a completely different story. Not long afterward, strange comments started floating through family gatherings. One of her cousins joked about people who could never seem to pay their own bills. Another relative casually mentioned how generous Ethan was for supporting family members. I quickly realized those comments were not random. Somewhere along the line, the story had changed. Instead of being a single gift from a loving brother, it became proof that I depended on him financially. The whispers spread faster than I expected. Every event seemed to include another subtle remark about responsibility, ambition, or learning to stand on your own feet. Nobody mentioned my name directly, yet somehow everyone understood who they were talking about. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I worked 2 jobs and barely slept because I refused to rely on anyone, but I knew it would only make me look defensive. People who already believed the worst about you rarely change their minds because of explanations. They simply decide your emotions prove their assumptions were correct all along. When wedding weekend finally arrived, I carefully folded my navy blue dress into a garment bag and placed it in the back seat beside my overnight bag. The drive to the country club took nearly 3 hours. My old sedan rattled every time I accelerated, and as I pulled into the enormous parking lot, it looked ancient compared to the rows of luxury vehicles surrounding it. I took a deep breath before stepping out because I already felt as though I did not belong there. Still, I reminded myself that I was not there for Charlotte's family. I was there because my little brother was about to start a new chapter of his life, and nothing mattered more than supporting him. The country club looked like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft golden light across polished marble floors. Fresh flowers filled every hallway with expensive perfume, and waiters carried silver trays filled with drinks that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Charlotte's relatives moved through the ballroom with effortless confidence, laughing loudly as though the entire building belonged to them. Every designer suit and sparkling dress reminded me that I had entered a world where people measured worth very differently than the one I came from. I spotted Ethan near the entrance talking with 2 of his closest friends. The moment he saw me, his face lit up exactly the way it always had. He walked over, wrapped me in a hug, and quietly told me I looked beautiful. Hearing those words nearly brought tears to my eyes because they came from someone who had never judged me by my paycheck or the clothes I wore. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. I honestly believed the evening might pass peacefully after all. Then Charlotte appeared beside us, wearing an elegant smile that looked flawless from every angle. She kissed my cheek, complimented my dress, and thanked me for making the trip. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she stepped back. Before walking away, she casually mentioned that everyone had assigned seats for dinner so the evening would stay organized. She smiled once more, then disappeared into the crowd before I even had the chance to respond. I watched her leave, completely unaware that those simple words were quietly setting the stage for the most painful moment of my entire life. Dinner was announced a few minutes later, and everyone slowly made their way toward the beautifully decorated tables. Laughter filled the ballroom as guests searched for their place cards, chatting over the soft music drifting through the speakers. I waited until most people had found their seats before walking toward the display. It seemed easier that way. I picked up my purse, smoothed the wrinkles from my dress, and started looking for my name. At first I thought someone had forgotten to include my card because every table near the front was filled with family members from both sides except me. Then I noticed one last card sitting alone on a tiny round table tucked beside the kitchen entrance. The table looked completely different from every other one in the room. There was no floral centerpiece, no sparkling crystal glasses, and no elegant decorations. A wrinkled white tablecloth covered the surface beside a plain pitcher of water. It looked like the kind of table reserved for unexpected guests or extra staff members. After every important seat had already been taken, my hands felt strangely cold as I picked up the card. Written across the front was my name, and underneath it were two simple words that immediately made my stomach sink: overflow seating. For several seconds I simply stood there staring at the card, trying to convince myself there had to be some logical explanation. Maybe another guest had accidentally moved it, maybe the coordinator had made an honest mistake. But deep inside I already knew the truth. This was not an accident. It was far too specific. Someone wanted to send a message without saying a single cruel word out loud. I heard quiet whispers behind me and turned just enough to notice one of Charlotte's cousins looking directly at my card before exchanging an uncomfortable glance with his girlfriend. Neither of them laughed, yet the silence between them somehow hurt even more. A moment later, Charlotte's mother approached with perfectly rehearsed concern spread across her face. She looked at the card, pressed a hand dramatically against her chest, and announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that there must have been some terrible mistake. She called for one of the event coordinators with just enough urgency to appear innocent, but there was no real surprise in her voice. Everything about her reaction felt practiced, almost theatrical, as though she wanted witnesses to remember how helpful she had been instead of questioning how the situation happened in the first place. I looked across the ballroom searching for Ethan. He was standing near the bar laughing with Charlotte's father. Completely unaware of what was happening, Charlotte remained surrounded by her bridesmaids, smiling as if the evening were unfolding exactly as planned. I felt heat rising into my face, not because anyone had shouted at me, but because humiliation wrapped in politeness leaves you with no obvious enemy. If I became upset, people would simply call me emotional. They would say it was only a seating error and wonder why I was making such a scene. That is exactly why people like Charlotte get away with this kind of cruelty. For a long moment I debated leaving without saying goodbye. My car keys were already in my hand. I imagined driving home, hanging the dress back in my closet, and pretending this weekend had never happened. It seemed easier than sitting alone beside the kitchen while everyone else celebrated together. Just as I turned slightly toward the exit, I heard Ethan calling my name. His voice was cheerful at first, but that changed the instant he noticed where I was standing. His eyes moved from my face to the lonely table and finally to the place card still clutched in my hand. The happiness disappeared from his expression so quickly it almost frightened me. The room never became completely silent, yet conversations nearby began fading one by one as people sensed something was wrong. Ethan gently took the card from my hand and read every word twice before turning it over as if expecting another explanation to appear on the back. There was nothing there except the same humiliating message. He slowly looked around the ballroom, then back at me. His voice remained calm, but I recognized the dangerous steadiness beneath it. He quietly asked whether anyone had said something to me. I shook my head because I honestly could not find the words to explain months of quiet disrespect packed into one unbearable moment. Without another word, Ethan walked straight toward the head table. Every person in the room watched as he picked up Charlotte's place card, then her parents' cards, and carefully lined them beside one another. He looked around the room before asking a single question that instantly changed the atmosphere. Why is my sister the only close family member sitting at an overflow table near the kitchen? Nobody answered immediately. Charlotte's mother stepped forward with another polished smile, insisting there had obviously been a mistake because large events were complicated. Ethan did not even look at her. Instead, he calmly asked who had personally arranged the seating chart. Nobody spoke for several uncomfortable seconds before Charlotte's mother quietly admitted that Charlotte had organized every table herself. Ethan slowly turned toward his fiancée. She had stopped smiling the moment she realized every guest was watching. As we walked across the ballroom toward her, I noticed several bridesmaids avoiding eye contact completely. Charlotte looked directly at Ethan with perfectly practiced confusion and claimed she had seated me beside one of his relatives. Ethan silently handed her the place card. She stared at it for the briefest moment, before insisting it was not her handwriting and suggesting that perhaps someone from the event staff had made an error during setup. For just an instant, before her expression settled back into calm innocence, I caught something flash across her face. It was impossible to describe exactly what I saw. Maybe it was satisfaction. Maybe it was irritation that her plan had been discovered. Whatever it was disappeared almost immediately. Ethan continued staring at her without saying a word. The silence stretched so long that several guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Finally he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed the venue manager. He placed the call on speaker for everyone nearby to hear. When the manager answered, Ethan calmly introduced himself and requested that the entire wedding reservation be cancelled immediately. The manager reminded him that the deposit could not be refunded. Ethan replied that he understood and repeated his request without hesitation. As soon as the call ended, Charlotte turned completely pale. She begged him to stop and asked what he was doing. Ethan looked at her with heartbreaking disappointment instead of anger. That expression somehow carried even more weight than shouting ever could. Charlotte's father finally stepped between them, insisting that whatever misunderstanding had happened should be discussed privately. Ethan laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He said the private moments were exactly what had brought them to this point. He reminded everyone how Charlotte's mother constantly made subtle remarks about where I lived. He mentioned the jokes from cousins who had spent months calling me a burden without ever saying my name directly. Then he looked at Charlotte and admitted he had ignored those warning signs because he wanted to believe the woman he loved would eventually accept the people who mattered most to him. Ethan then revealed something I had never expected him to share publicly. He explained that months earlier his business account had briefly been frozen because of an accounting issue while several payments were delayed. During that stressful week, I quietly loaned him $800 from the emergency savings I had spent years building. I had never mentioned it to anyone because helping family did not require an audience. Ethan explained that he repaid every cent a few weeks later, yet somehow the story changed into me depending on him financially. He looked directly at Charlotte and asked whether she had started those rumors herself. Charlotte tried to deny everything, but Ethan interrupted before she could continue. He admitted that one afternoon she had accidentally left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while he searched for the caterer's contact information. He had no intention of reading private conversations, but a message appearing on the screen immediately caught his attention. It was a conversation between Charlotte and her mother discussing how embarrassed they felt whenever I attended family events. One message stayed burned into his memory forever because it described the overflow table as a subtle reminder that I should know my place. The entire ballroom seemed frozen. Charlotte's mother looked as though all the color had drained from her face. Her father struggled to find words that never came. Charlotte finally burst into tears, apologizing through broken sentences. While claiming she had simply been insecure about the close relationship Ethan and I shared, she insisted she felt as though she would always come second. I had remained silent through almost everything, but hearing that excuse finally pushed me past my limit. I looked directly at her and quietly asked what exactly she believed she was competing against. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. My voice trembled at first, but each sentence became stronger than the last. I reminded Charlotte that I was not another woman trying to steal her fiancé. I was the sister who changed his diapers when our exhausted mother worked late into the night. I was the one who drove him to school, sat beside him in emergency rooms, celebrated every birthday, and comforted him after our father abandoned us. Loving my brother had never taken anything away from her. The only person turning that relationship into a competition was the woman standing in front of me. Charlotte cried harder, but nothing she said afterward mattered anymore. The truth had already filled the room, and there was no way to force it back into silence. Ethan reached for my hand exactly the way he had years earlier whenever one of us needed strength. He quietly told me we were leaving. Together we walked through the ballroom, while dozens of stunned guests stepped aside without saying a word. Nobody tried to stop us. The only sounds I remember hearing were our footsteps, echoing across the polished floor, and the heavy doors closing behind us. Later that night, we ended up at a small roadside diner a few miles away. We ordered burgers and fries even though neither of us had much appetite. We sat there until almost 2 a.m. talking about everything except the wedding. Ethan never apologized for canceling it because he believed there was nothing to apologize for. I never thanked him for choosing me because family should never have to earn loyalty. We simply shared a quiet meal to children from a broken home who had survived life by refusing to let go of each other. The following morning, my phone started filling with messages from strangers. Someone at the rehearsal dinner had secretly recorded the confrontation, especially the moment Ethan canceled the wedding in front of everyone. The video spread through Charlotte's social circle faster than anyone expected. Former friends began exposing old group conversations where she mocked my clothes, my jobs, and my financial struggles. Several members of her bridal party publicly distanced themselves from her. Her carefully crafted reputation collapsed almost overnight. Watching it happen did not bring me satisfaction. Revenge sounds exciting in stories, but in real life it usually leaves behind nothing except exhaustion. Life slowly settled into something peaceful again. About 6 months later, Ethan met a woman named Grace while volunteering at a community fundraiser. She worked as a nurse, laughed easily, and treated every person she met with genuine kindness. The first time she came to dinner, she carried a homemade casserole instead of an expensive gift and spent the evening listening instead of showing off. She never cared how much money anyone earned or where they lived. She only cared whether they were good people. Seeing my brother smile beside someone who valued his heart instead of his success healed something inside me that I did not even realize was still broken. The navy blue dress still hangs inside my closet today. Every time I see it, I remember that painful evening. But I also remember something far more important. Being underestimated never made me weak. Being treated as though I was less than someone else never changed my value. Sometimes people spend so much energy trying to make you feel small that they forget character cannot be measured by money, status, or appearances. In the end, the only thing that truly lasted was the bond between a brother and sister, who refused to let anyone convince them they were worth less than they had always known.